Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fourth of our sessions here. It's so good to see you all. I just need to say something about our field trip in 2 weeks to Wilmot. Julianne will be talking to you more about that at the end of today, and we'll make sure that you know exactly what's happening and what we're supposed to do. So just a little warning, but don't focus on that, please. Okay. This morning, I'm very pleased to introduce you to Dr. Cynthia Nazario Leary.
Very good.
And she is our Alachua County Master Gardener head, I will call her. There's a more formal title, which I'll tell you in just a minute. Okay. Cynthia is the University of Florida IFAS extension agent, as I said, for Alachua County. She received her bachelor's degree in landscape contracting from Penn State University. And I don't even think Cynthia knows this, but when I first became a master gardener in Pennsylvania, I was under the rubric of Penn State. So you're familiar with that area and the beautiful campus. Okay. She, after getting her bachelor's, she developed an interest in tropical ecosystems and ethnobotany, which led to her pursuing her master's degree in horticulture. But she didn't go to Penn State for that. She went to the University of Hawaii in Manoa. With a specialization in ecology, evolution, and conservation history. A bit different from Penn State, I'd say, weather-wise. This was followed by a doctorate in natural resources and environmental management, where she researched the development of native plant agroforestry systems. Cynthia then began working in extension in Hawaii as an urban horticultural and floriculture agent for the University of Hawaii in Maui County. Then after 20 years in Hawaii, she moved with her family back here to Gainesville. In her current position as the University of Florida IFAS extension agent, she coordinates the Master Gardener volunteer program, and she implements the Florida-friendly landscaping programs, and she supports gardening in the community. I must tell you this, the Master Gardener volunteers, over 100 strong, and there's Mary over there, Mary White, who gave us a presentation earlier. I think Mary would agree with me that we are absolutely delighted to have Cynthia with us. Yeah. She aims to combine, Cynthia does, to combine her extension experience with her passion for communicating science-based information to engage the community as a whole and to affect positive change. So with that, I will turn this over to Cynthia, and we will get going.
All right, thank you so much. That was a very kind introduction. No, that's okay. I know. And then I didn't know if we wanted to dim the lights just a little bit. Can everybody see that okay? All right, I'm trying a new green for Florida friendly, and I love how it kind of matches the chairs in here. Just turn it. Let me switch. Plugged in, so. Okay, great. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, there we go. Excellent. Okay, I tend to move around. I use my hands too. I'm definitely a teacher at heart. So again, thank you, Diane. Thank you for having me here. I always love the opportunity to be able to speak to the community especially about Florida-friendly landscaping. This is, definitely something we want to encourage. And as we have more development going on in our county, getting people knowledgeable and educated about Florida-friendly practices, I think is going to be very important for the future development of this county and protecting our environments. So what are the main things that we want to cover that I want to share with you in this presentation is really knowing what the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program is and why is it important. So I like to start out because this is actually a statute. So the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program is in our law, and it's to provide quality landscapes that conserve water, protect the environment, and are adaptable to local conditions and are drought tolerant. So the primary purpose of this program is really about water conservation. And as we'll go through with the presentation, you'll see why, because our water resources, one, are extremely valuable, but they're also limited in the sense that as we have more people moving into the state, we have more people using those same water resources. So what is Florida-friendly landscaping, right? It's this goal to conserve water and protect our water quality. But the approaches that we use for Florida-friendly landscaping, why I really like it, is that it's an integrated approach. So you're really looking at, of course, we want to have landscapes that we enjoy being a part of, that we enjoy looking at, right? But we also want to balance that aesthetic part of the landscaping with that environmental aspect, as well as maintaining the function. What is the function of that landscape going to be? And for Florida Friendly, we're really about protecting wildlife, looking to protect those ecological components that we find out in nature within our landscapes. And a lot of times when we focus on making sure that our environments kind of work within the natural habitat or are conserving or environmentally sustainable, what we're also doing is that we can actually make these landscapes can actually be less maintenance. Now I say can because there's always those folks, right, who want to do the extra and they want a landscape to look a certain way. And as soon as you have qualifications for how you want something to look, that's going to feed into really how much maintenance you have. But as we're going to go over all the principles, you'll see that when you get the right plant in the right place, when you match your landscape to your environment, you can really reduce the number of inputs and management to that landscape. So I always like to show this picture. It's a little bit blurry. It looked really great on my computer. But what I like to show about this picture is that Florida is surrounded by water, and we have a lot of water in our state, right? We have a lot of fresh water. We have a lot of lakes. And so we need to protect those resources. As we have development coming in, everybody is using those fresh water resources. And everybody's like, oh, but we get so much rain and, we should have plenty of water. But it's still not enough water when everybody's using it. The water that's percolating down is still being used faster than it is collecting. So even though we have a lot of water in our state, we also have a lot of water users. So some other things with environmental concerns is the water quality. You can have lots of water, but if your water isn't good quality, right, so that we can use it for drinking, we can use it for watering our crops. If we don't have that and to support our broader environments and wildlife, then that water is really doing us no good. So we want to maintain the integrity, right, of our freshwater systems. And really the main way to do this is to reduce the number of those pollutants that are going into our water systems. When we think usually of pollutants, we think of maybe industry, maybe we think of our cars, maybe we're thinking of those pollutants that we can really see, right? That maybe change the color of something or are pretty evident. And a lot of those are called point source pollution, right? We know where they come from. What's a little bit more, subtle and not as easy to track is what we call non-point source pollution. And that's the pollution that maybe is coming from various different areas, and it's very hard to pinpoint exactly where it's all coming from. And what happens is when you have a lot of individual houses or residences, right, and you spread that out, we're not tracking each residence for their pollution that they're putting in. But if you add up all those residences, right, and you add up all the things that are coming off of those yards or coming out of those homes, it does add up to a lot. So the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program is really about how can we educate and increase the knowledge of folks so that they're reducing that pollution that might be coming off of their yards or coming off of their homes and entering into our public waterways. And one of the main culprits are fertilizers and pesticides, because we're putting them out into the landscape. But if they're not used, in particularly nitrogen, as well as we've got plenty of phosphorus. So if you're adding phosphorus, it's just not being used by the plants, or it can't be used fast enough, right? So we're going to talk about one of the principles is how to use fertilizer effectively so that you're optimizing that plant uptake so that the extra fertilizer isn't going down and percolating into our freshwater systems. So that's really the main focus of the Florida Friendly Landscaping is really reducing those inputs. The other thing to understand about the way our water system works is a lot of people think that the water goes down the storm drain and there's some filter down there that filters everything out. But it doesn't. What goes down our storm drains goes right into our streams, and then that usually feeds into a broader stream that either is going to go into a sink, right? And those sinks are directly connected to our aquifer underneath. They're like, a big drain that goes down. So any trash, any pollutants, any extra fertilizers or pesticides that wash down our stormwater drains are going to get directly into our main water bodies, whether that's the aquifer underneath, the stream, maybe a waterway that ends up going out to the coastline, okay? So there's no filter underneath there. We're very fortunate here in Gainesville to have the Sweetwater Wetland Park, but that's only for the Sweetwater branch. That's not for all the other streams and that we have here in Alachua County. But that is a great example of, where we are trying to, construct systems that can help clean and filter that water. But that's using a natural system, right? Payne's Prairie plus a constructed wetland to kind of filter out that water. But we don't have that for all the streams. So it's really important to know where your stormwater drains drain to, so that you can see where anything that comes off your yard, where is that going to go? The other thing is this with this picture of this fluorescent green is that understanding, people are like, well, why would nitrogen or phosphorus, these are nutrients, why is that bad? Why is that bad for the environment? You would think that that would be good, right? You're feeding plants, other plants. Well, in nature, what happens is that the plants that are the best, and usually the ones that are the most aggressive, get to those nutrients first. And they're able to use that nutrients to grow. And so you usually have algae or a lot of invasive species. The reason why they're invasive is because they're very good at what they do. And that is capturing nutrients. They're able to grow fast and they take over and they outcompete anybody else. So then what happens is you have altered environments because of these extra nutrients coming in. Our ecosystems, they are evolved to whatever the nutrient cycling is going on there, right? So if we add nutrients into a system, we're now causing an imbalance. There's more nutrients than those plants that are native to that area have evolved with. And they're just like, whoa, this is like extra stuff. I don't need it. But the algae and maybe some other invasive plants, they're like, yes, I will take this nitrogen up. I will grow big, green, and crowd out everybody else. And before you know it, we have an altered environment that's not maybe functioning as well because it's out of balance. Okay, this is one of my favorite slides. I think it's a favorite slide for all extension agents. But it's also kind of a sad slide, right? Because these were, this is on the, let's see if I can make my laser work. Okay, so this was based in 2010. The developed areas were in red or magenta, whatever you want to call that. And then you had your protected areas in green. And then when you look at what they estimate with population increase and development, where we're looking at developed areas. And if you look at like Alachua County, and especially Marion County, the development just explodes, right? And we lose a lot of those greenways, maybe green areas or wildlife corridors. So this is what's projected for 2070. And so we have time to act, and we can be proactive knowing this. And one of the things that we can do is educate and inform people on Florida-friendly landscaping, because that's going to reduce, even if we develop, can we create refuges for wildlife and natural areas? Can we create buffer areas so that all the water coming off of all these houses and commercial buildings, is that allowed to filter somehow? Or, are we reducing the number of inputs that are going in? So even though we have the development, we're probably not going to be able to stop people moving in, but can we have landscapes in place that minimize the negative impact of that development? So as I mentioned, the Florida population is expected to double by 2070. And in addition, when you look at, especially when you look at different climate models and how they feel like they're going to impact Florida, you're going to have an increase of people moving into this area, into the northeast area. There's also some other models that show increasing temperatures as well here by several degrees, which means you're going to see a shift in the type of plants and the landscape that is going to grow. So, people tend to move to Florida because they love the warm temperatures, and I just have this feeling that more people, because South Florida will be already filled to capacity or having seawater intrusion, that more people are going to move to the center and northeast. So we need to anticipate that this increase is going to occur. And with that increase of people, we're going to have an increase in demand for water. So this, I recommend everybody, if you're interested in the projections into the future for Florida, to check out the 1000friendsoflorida.org. This is where I got this document and all the maps. UF is also a partner in this project. And so what's really nice is they've looked at, this is the anticipated water demand in 2070. But if we can do things like Florida-friendly landscaping, as well as some other water conservation efforts, they really feel like we can modify, that water demand, that we can reduce it from being as high as it is. So if everybody did Florida-friendly landscaping in their yard, just think of that multiplied over everybody's yard. That is a huge impact. So a study, I believe it was in Tampa, that was done by the University of Florida, found that approximately 60% of homeowner water use in Florida was from lawn and landscape irrigation. That's over 50% of the water used in some of these residences were used for irrigation alone. That, to me, if we can reduce that number, even if we made it to 50% or below 50%, just think of that times the number of yards and residences that we have. that would make an impact just on the water use alone. So Florida-friendly landscaping is made up of 9 principles. And I'm going to go over the 9 principles, but I'm going to emphasize the first one because I feel like if you're going to take any of the principles home, take home the first one, because once you get the first one, all the other ones I feel fall in line. So it's a collection of practices, and I want to say, when I was first introduced to Florida-friendly landscaping, I was like, oh my gosh, okay, so there are these rules, and you got to do this, and you got to do that. But it's actually more of a guideline or a roadmap to help people make decisions about how they want to make their yard more Florida-friendly, more environmentally friendly. Okay, so there's different practices involved between even design, installation, how we operate and maintain, and really with those overarching goals, right, for conservation of water, to reduce that irrigation water use, protect the water quality, and reduce those inputs that are going to impact that water quality. Okay, so here are the 9 principles we have. The first one is right plant, right place. And I'm going to spend the most time on that because, like I said, you get that one. All these other ones, I feel kind of you're going to get them. Water efficiently, fertilize appropriately, mulch, attract wildlife, manage yard pests, recycle, reduce stormwater runoff, and protect the waterfront. All right, so first principle, right plant, right place. I'm going to kind of ask you, because I always like to ask folks, what do you think right plant, right place means? What is that to you? And the master gardeners can't answer because they know the answer. Does anybody want to? Yes, you're here in the front.
Right. It means you look at the requirements that the plant has, and if it's a plant that needs shade, you don't plant it in full sun. It's not going to do well there.
Right.
And vice versa.
Yes. So it's like a matchmaking process, okay? You have maybe the plants that you want to put in your yard, right? And then you have the environment of your yard. And you need to figure out which of those plants is going to match what you have. Sometimes what you want doesn't match what you have. And that's okay, because usually maybe you have an idea of that plant that you really like. Usually you can find some substitute that's going to be Florida friendly, that's going to match that area. Maybe it's a color. Maybe you've always wanted a certain color. Well, let's find a plant that matches those light. What are the main requirements of plants, right? We have light, we have water, and we have soil, okay? So as the person here said in the front, if you have a light-loving plant, a plant that needs 6 to 12 hours of sun, they're going to need to be out in full sun. Planting them under your oak tree is probably not going to work for that plant. If they are a plant that doesn't mind having its roots wet most of the time, then that's a plant that's going to thrive maybe in an area of your yard that stays wet. Maybe it's a swale or some sort of divot in your yard. Whereas a plant that doesn't like its feet wet, it likes that really good drainage, it wants to have dry periods, that is not going to do well in those areas. And then you have soil, right? We have a really sandy soil that dries out, that can dry out very quickly. So if it's, if the plant is not used to those conditions, it's going to have a harder time. pH of soil is going to impact. That's probably when people do their soil test. How many people have done a soil test here? We got more people need to do the soil test. That's going to tell you your pH. And the pH is going to tell you some plants can operate in a wide range of pH, and other ones, maybe they like it slightly acidic, like blueberries. Or maybe you're going to have ones that can take it more alkaline. But knowing that range of your plants and what pH you actually have in your yard is going to help you make that match much better. And knowing that can change. You want to sample throughout your yard, right? Because maybe on the north side of your house, you have more shade, but on the south side of your house, you're going to have more sun. So it's not only matching it wanting it in your yard, but where in your yard it's going to go. Another thing to consider with right plant, right place that some people don't think about is that landscapes are dynamic, right? They don't stay the way you put them in. Plants are going to grow. And so when you, let's say, put in a tree, there's a reason why we provide on those tags that this tree can reach up to 20 feet or 30 feet. And I know it looks small right now, but it is going to get bigger. And if you plant that in front of a window, or maybe you plant that under a power line, that's going to lead to something having to give, right? Either the tree's going to have to go, or you're going to have to constantly prune it to be able to maintain it in that place that you originally had. So when you're thinking about right plant, right place, think about too, maybe 5 to 10 years down the road. What do you envision that landscape looking like? How big are those plants going to get, right? For trees, they're usually going to get taller. A lot of people don't think about ground covers. Ground covers want to spread. They want to keep going out. And so if you don't have a way of containing them, or thinking about, oh, well, yeah, I want them here, but I don't want them there, then that's also another consideration for right plant, right place. The last point I wanted to make about right plant, right place, we just had a Master Gardener talk last night, and she was talking about Florida-friendly landscaping, and she asked, what is the hardest principle for folks? And it was right plant, right place. And I feel like, because people are like, oh my God, I got to get it right, right? It's like this pressure to get the plants right. Gardening is trial and error. So don't be hard on yourself if you don't get it right the first time. What it is being knowledgeable that if you see a plant that is not thriving, that you can recognize to say, yeah, maybe that plant isn't in the right place, and maybe I either need to move it or put something else there. And don't be married to it, in the sense that, you can move plants around. Some are more amenable to that than others, but in general, you can move plants around and you can change your mind. So you try your best, you do your due diligence, you research what those plants' needs are, you find out what the conditions are in your yard, and then you do your best, knowing that most likely you're going to have to move some things around. Okay, principle number 2. Of course, this is Florida-friendly landscaping, and we're talking about water conservation. So watering efficiently, right? We want to reduce our irrigation. And in some cases, you can, especially with Florida-friendly landscaping, once you get them established, many of these plants don't need to be watered. They can adapt to the water conditions, the precipitation that we have in this area. There was something else I wanted to pick up with the right plant, right place, but it comes here too, is that, we encourage the use of native plants in Florida-friendly landscaping. It's not exclusive to native plants, though. I just want to say that you can do a mix and match. But with native plants too, understanding that they may have a narrower or wider kind of tolerance of different environmental conditions. Yes, they're native, so many of them are adapted to kind of maybe periods of drought, right? Like we're kind of in a little drought right now, right? We had a lot of rain, but now the water's really percolated through. The sandy soils I know around my house are really dry. So some of the native plants may do better in that. But a lot of native plants they haven't been cultivated or grown for a long time as a landscape plant. So sometimes bringing a native plant into a landscape or urban environment can be a little bit challenging too. So that's why making sure that you know what, for me, when you're thinking about native plants, think about where it grows naturally. Can you kind of recreate those conditions in your yard? It's more likely going to help it. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was there's a difference between a plant surviving and a plant thriving. Okay, when a plant is surviving, it's on the border. It's getting by. So if you have a drought or maybe you have soaring temperatures that go into 90 degrees like we had last week, or we have an unexpected freeze, right? Those plants are not as resilient because they're living on the edge, okay? We want plants that are resilient, that can kind of be a little bit more resilient to those changes, especially in this climate right now where things are very unexpected. And so being able to have plants that are thriving, they're just going to do better. They're going to usually require less maintenance, less watering, and as well, they're going to be able to tolerate those kind of extreme events that we may have. So while we're talking about irrigation, I did want to remind everybody of our Alachua County codes when it comes to irrigation. So in Alachua County, during the summer, which is considered the wet season from March to November, you can water up to 2 times a week. That doesn't mean water 2 times a week. It means if you need it, you can water up to 2 times a week. But in Florida Friendly Landscaping, we want you to water to what you need. If the plants don't need water, especially if it's rained, don't water. Only water when your plants need it, usually when they're getting established. And then in the winter, sorry, that got cut off a little bit. It's down to 1 time a week or no time a week. We turn off our irrigation in the winter. A lot about watering, and I think fertilizing too, when it comes to Florida Friendly Landscaping, is you have to decide what is your level of tolerance for a little bit of brown, maybe some insects eating some of your leaves. It's all about what are you okay with having in your yard? How many imperfections, right, are you going to be okay with? And when this idea of a perfect beauty being maybe a perfectly green lawn and flower and shrubs or plants that are always looking perfectly manicured. If that's your idea, that's going to be a little bit higher maintenance, and you're going to have to think about that watering schedule. But if you have a flexibility in that idea of what you consider beautiful and appropriate for you, then you can adjust some of these management. Yeah, there was a question here. Duration. So that really depends. Right, right. So what we say when we think about duration is you want about 3/4 of an inch to an inch of water, especially for turf. Because more than that, the plants, it's just going to be too much water for them to use, but you want enough water that it saturates far enough down. That's going to be based on your irrigation system. So you have a drip system or you have more high output irrigation system. The volume of water that's going to go out depends on your irrigation. So what we suggest is to basically calibrate your system. You can put out collection devices like little cans or little plastic dishes, and you run your irrigation system to see how much water is in there. And you're aiming for that inch of water. So however long that takes, whether that's a half an hour, 20 minutes, because that's really going to depend on your system. And you want to have that space throughout, because remember, irrigation systems sometimes aren't even, right? So you want to make sure wherever you're irrigating, if you wanted to calibrate, to know how much. And that's really important because there was a woman who came to me, we were at Hale's Farmers Market, and she said, well, is 15 minutes enough? It may or may not be. So you really need to measure to see if that 15 minutes is giving you that inch of water that's going to be able to go in. Because if it's not enough, then actually your plants may be suffering from drought, and then you're like, yeah, but I'm watering my 2 times a week. I can't water much more, but you could water for longer if you're not meeting that 1 inch. So you'll need to play around with that depending on your irrigation system. Really good question. Okay, so fertilize appropriately. So as we spoke earlier about that, one of the main goals of Florida Friendly Landscaping is to reduce the number of inputs, right? Those nutrient pollutants, as we call them, into our waterways. So as I mentioned, soil test, that's really going to tell you what your baseline is, right? It's going to tell you most likely you don't need phosphorus because our soils are naturally high in phosphorus here. So really what are the main culprit is nitrogen and phosphorus. So in Alachua County, we'll go over the when you can fertilize, but with nitrogen, you always need to use a slow release, at least 50%. So 50%, look on your bag. When you look at the nitrogen, it should be at least 50% slow release. Does anybody know what slow release is? So slow release means it's going to be released over time. They're usually some type of granulated pellet that's coated. So anybody familiar with Osmocote or Nutricote, those tend to be slow release. But each manufacturer kind of has their own chemistry for that. It's opposed to the regular fertilizer, which is you're going to put it on and it's going to release it right away. Usually if you're doing straight up nitrogen like a urea, those are not going to be slow release. What's going to happen is then all that nitrogen goes in, and if you haven't measured it appropriately, you're usually going to have extra nitrogen that your plants can't take up because they can only take up so much. So the slow release really allows that nitrogen to be released over time. And when we talk about the ban, I don't like to say ban. It's saying when we should and shouldn't fertilize. Starting in July through February, that's where if you put your nitrogen slow release on before that time, you can have it lengthen the season. Okay, so I always tell folks maybe May and June, if you want to fertilize with nitrogen, do a slow release and do it right around that time to try and extend the season. This does not apply to compost. Okay, so you can always top dress with a compost in the fall if you feel like you need to give a little boost of nitrogen in the fall to your plantings. And remember, gardens are exempt from this, right? If you have a vegetable garden, you can still fertilize. This is for landscapes and ornamentals. Okay, so mulching. What does mulching do? Mulching is really kind of, I call that insulating blanket for landscapes. It's going to allow for better soil moisture retention. So your landscape beds aren't going to dry out as fast. As well, they're going to protect and kind of break down and add to that organic matter that we want to have in our beds. There's lots of different types of mulches. I feel like I could do a whole talk just on mulches because we get a lot of questions about that. Pine needles are great. And they're a nice local source. They're usually readily available, and you can usually find them free from your neighbors who are trying to get rid of them. But they do break down very quickly, so you'll need to replenish them. I like the nuggets, the pine nuggets. They last a little bit longer, and they tend to have a better, they do better with like weed control. So they're going to be better at, minimizing the number of weed seeds. Mulch is not weed proof, okay? Really, there's not a lot that's weed proof. Even those weed mats, I feel like weeds can still get in there. But what it's going to do is it's going to slow it down. And the idea is you want to give the competitive advantage to the plants you're planting, to the plants you want. So let them get bigger and be able to compete in that space. One thing too with mulch is that I'm so sorry. That's okay. I want to make sure everybody can hear me online. Let's see, where was I? So with the mulch, so lots of people use that to cover up bare areas. But remember, your mulch, it's only going to work so well. What works better as a weed competitor are the plants themselves. So try and minimize that bare space. Also, if you have large spaces that are just covered in mulch, eventually that mulch runs off too, or it can float away. So I encourage you to try and balance it out when you're using mulch. Mulch also delineates landscape beds. So for maintenance folks, the landscape guys, they tend to like clearly delineated beds, so it's easier for them to border. But try out different mulches for what works best for you. You're going to need about 2 to 3 inches to really get the effects of a good mulch. But they can really provide both a soil moisture buffer as well as a temperature buffer. Okay, principle number 5, attracting wildlife. So this is the stuff you want to have in your yard. We were having a conversation about wildlife. Not everybody wants the armadillo wildlife, right? You want the butterfly wildlife, but not the others. Unfortunately, nature doesn't always know those delineations. But I feel like if you want to attract more birds, pollinators, insects into your yard, then you need to create the habitat for them. And basically, these insects are looking for food. Okay, so in the nectar or pollen usually provides them the protein, and nectar provides them the energy through the sugars. So you want pollen, you want nectar, you usually want some sort of place where they can rest. So some sort of refuge, or maybe place where they can, create nests and continue their progeny. Also places where maybe they can access water, because insects need water too. So creating those spaces, that's again, go back to that right plant, right place. Pollinator plants are wonderful, but you only want to grow pollinator plants where they're going to thrive, right? So you want to make sure that you're picking the right place for your pollinator or wildlife habitat that you're creating. Additionally, know that when you're attracting butterflies, what else are you attracting? What is a butterfly before it's a butterfly? It's a caterpillar. And what do caterpillars eat? They eat leaves. So if you want the butterflies, you're probably going to have the caterpillars, and the caterpillars are going to eat some of the leaves. So you need to be able to tolerate a certain amount of herbivory, leaf damage to support that, in those insects. But the idea is that most of our not so desirable insects, it's a very small percent, probably at 1 to 2%, whereas actually most of the insects that we see are actually beneficial, and they're providing that balance in your yard. You can have those praying mantis, those spiders, those assassin bugs. I always love that name. Those insects are going to help control maybe the aphids and the other undesirable sucking and chewing insects. So having those present in your yard can really keep down the pesticide application. So that leads us to principle number 6, managing landscapes pests responsibly. We don't want to go nuclear in our yards. I know you see that one insect and you're like, oh my God, I got to get rid of it. And then you apply something that's going to also kill everything else, right? And so then you are also killing its natural enemies. And what happens is then you kind of get into this cycle where you have to keep putting down pesticide because there's no good insects, I guess, to keep the bad insects in check, right? So using integrated pest management, which in a nutshell is basically going out, figuring out what insect it is before you decide to kill it. And if it is an insect or a pest that you want to control, understand its life cycle. And the extension office can help you with that. Usually we accept pictures, we accept phone calls from folks trying to figure out what it is that might be eating their plants or causing problems. Because when you know what it is, you can better plan an attack or a defense system for it, right? It may be a timing thing. Maybe it's something you can control simply by pruning or some different cultural practices. Maybe you don't need the pesticide. All right, principle number 7, recycle yard waste. It always amazes me here, and I know we have a lot of oak leaves, but that people buy bags to then bag all this leaves and stuff off their yard. Because so much of it, we want to keep there. We're removing nutrients that would go into our yard, and then we're adding fertilizer. But in natural systems, there's no fertilizer. The trees dropping their leaves, there's this nutrient cycling component. And I think if we provide education about how you can do nutrient cycling in your yard, in your own backyard as well, and a lot of that means reducing the amount you actually remove. Now, I get it. I've been to some landscape beds where it's like 10 to 12 inches of mulch. I mean, you don't need that much. You don't want that much. Again, aim for that 2 to 3 inches. So a lot of times you're going to have extra, but maybe there's another place where you can spread that out. Or, then at least, yes, bag it responsibly so it's not going into our roadways. Because one of our major contributors of nutrient pollution is the clippings and everything else that we push into the road, that goes into the gutter, that then goes into the stormwater drain. Those things, especially the grass clippings, they easily break down into the nutrient components of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium. And again, we have that algae and other plants that are going to take advantage of the breakdown of nutrients. The dead fish here is because a lot of times what happens when you have those algal blooms is they reduce the oxygen in the lakes and streams, and then the fish can't breathe. Even though they're breathing underwater, they're actually breathing in dissolved oxygen. And so one of the ways we can actually look at the health of our systems is that dissolved oxygen. And you'll see that dissolved oxygen goes way down as soon as we have these algal blooms and these algal growths. So to me, it's keeping as much of the moisture and as much as the mulch or the leaves that are coming into your yard, keep them there so that they can slowly enter into your yard and you're creating your own nutrient cycling system. Okay, principle 8, reduce stormwater runoff. I've mentioned this, I've touched upon this before, right? The water is not getting filtered. It's when it runs off into our roads, that's collecting. We all know what's on our roadways, right? We've got car oil and maybe, spilled chemicals here and there. All that's being washed down into the stormwater system. So we really want to reduce that. That means, again, looking at our irrigation. We shouldn't be irrigating to the point that we have a river in our roads, right, from the runoff. Maybe having less impervious surfaces, reducing the amount of concrete or surfaces where the water can't percolate down naturally and filter through. So really thinking about maybe how you have water runoff. One of the biggest issues I see in landscaping, we were just at a site the other day, is they were having trouble growing plants because they have a lot of wet area. And the wet area is because their downspouts are not being directed in a way so that the water can come out of the downspout and then maybe filter out and slowly percolate in. Instead, it's running off. It's this high volume of water. It's entering into the landscape, and it's just either washing stuff out or it's keeping it too wet for those landscape plants. And I see this again and again. So really understanding how water moves on your property is going to help you address this principle and also be able to water efficiently. When you see an area where maybe plants aren't thriving, look at the weeds in that area. Usually the weeds, it's like dollar weed, or it's that other one that looks like dollar weed, but it has more of a clasp leaf. Or the sedges. You see that, you know that soil is staying more wet than the other soils. And so maybe either think about matching a plant that doesn't mind its feet wet, or maybe think about how you can redirect the water. Here we have a lovely rain barrel that can store a lot of that excess water that then you can hook up to a drip irrigation system and use that gravity-fed water to water your plants. One thing with the rain barrels, though, is because that's water coming off your roof, I don't recommend using that for your vegetables, but you can use it for your landscape plants. Okay, principle number 9, protect the waterfront. so many times I'm like, yeah, but we're in Gainesville. We're not near any water. But we are. You could think about there's an aquifer right underneath our feet, right? So we are actually very close to the water. And if we think about our yards as all being, in a sense, waterfront property, we can think about how can we either slow down the water that's leaving our property, allowing it to percolate down, or if we have a retention pond or some sort of water body system nearby, how can we filter the water on its way to that water body so that as it's moving along, it's dropping those sediments, dropping those pollutants. They're able to filter into landscape areas before they reach that area. So usually for water bodies, they like to have a 10-foot buffer. You can do that with a lot of landscaping around those areas. Really, it's just about making sure that the water that's running off of our roadways or our driveways isn't directly entering into these water bodies, which again, feed right into our aquifer system. So I think how am I on time? I think I might be a little bit over. So I just wanted to go over for just really quickly with the statute, because I got a question about this the other day. So the statute says that yes, you are allowed to use Florida friendly. But remember, HOAs also have ordinances. And so you have to work with your HOA to determine what that Florida friendly can be. They can't restrict you from using Florida friendly, especially with right plant, right place issues. That's usually what I see, right? You have a shady tree and they want you to grow turf under the shady tree. And the turf will never grow under the shady tree, right? So you want to plant something else. That's where we can come in. I'm the FFL agent, so I usually come and, make a consultation. And then the enforcement is our Alachua County Environmental Protection Department. They're the ones that then reach out to the HOA and say, hey, we have this situation where this homeowner can't grow the turf, get the sod established because of this shade. We have this letter from our extension agent. Can you work something out? So far, it has not gone to court. Usually the HOAs are able to resolve it. What usually comes into question is somebody's like, well, I did FFL in my yard, so I should be able to do it. Well, FFL can cover a lot of things. So you can do FFL in your yard, but it still needs to be within the ordinances or the covenants of your HOA. And so I encourage people that if they want to make changes to those covenants in their HOA, become part of your HOA. Take that leadership role so that you can help determine and help frame what those covenants means, especially for Florida-friendly landscaping. But if you have any questions, you can contact our office or you can contact the Alachua County Environmental Protection Department. They have a whole water resources division. A lot of times too, HOAs will have specific plant lists and they will include Florida-friendly plants. So they'll say, yes, you can do Florida-friendly, but you have to do these plants. Again, if you want to change that, you need to get on the board and you need to help make those decisions. I am not an enforcer. I'm not going to go and ticket people or force HOAs to change. And let's see, what else I want to include from here. I think I said this already. And so, yes, this is basically just going over what I had said. We can discuss the code. We usually meet with, the different parties. Like I said, so far, we haven't had any issues. But really, the enforcement comes down to the Alachua County EPD. And then here's some resources. I realize these are links. Where I want to get to is right here. The Florida Friendly Landscaping has a great website, and now they have a bunch of apps. So if you are wanting to look at different plants, you can download this app, as well as they have some other apps as well. This goes over the different fertilizer ordinances. So if you're maybe have different residences in different counties, This is really for our landscapers who might have businesses in many counties. But we have another app for toxic plants, butterfly gardens, and bee gardens. And what I really like about this app is that you can filter it by your desired traits. So if you want a ground cover, you want a tree, or you're looking for a shade plant, you can also narrow down by zip code, which then helps. So you're not looking at plants that just grow in South Florida and not here. And then this is my contact information. I work closely with our commercial horticultural extension agent because she works with the landscape companies in the green industry. And I work with the homeowners and the HOAs. So between the both of us, we usually coordinate if, we want to do a site visit, we usually coordinate that together. And then I'll just leave it with, do you have any questions for me? I know we're probably really close on time.
Questions?
Thank you.
Let me get a microphone to you.
You often mention yards and homeowners associations, but our yard is oak hammock, and we don't have much control over that. But there are some things, and I want to give one example. There, at the end of the building,
Bob,
2 this way.
turn the mic this way. So,
Okay.
there we go.
There are some things like outside our apartment, it's heavy clay soils, it's usually wet, but the sprinklers come on every week, Monday evening. Advice to water less for our lawns seem to fall on deaf ears. Can IFAS help us here? Can you step in and say, well, you're really watering this too much? I mean, it's dollar weed or weeds. We need some help.
Yeah, I would, definitely for the irrigation, I would reach out to, you could reach out to us, and we're going to reach out to the EPD as well, because what they can do is they can look at the timers, and then we can look at the landscapes to see what's more, maybe a recommendation for the appropriate time interval for the frequency. The challenge with a lot of these places where you're all linked up is that you're on one timer for the whole thing, or you have zones that encompass a lot of different yards with a lot of different landscapes. So some people are getting too much, and maybe some people are getting too little. And it's finding that sweet spot that's going to work for everybody. And unfortunately, with irrigation, you have to kind of water to the minimum, right? You have to water to the ones that need the water most. Those high water, those landscapes that need more water. Because if you water to the minimum, then those plants are going to suffer. So the first thing would be, do you have an irrigation map? Do you have a map of how the irrigation is laid out for oak hammock? I don't know if you know, but that would be one place that would really help us. Sorry.
Yeah. The first thing is you're almost preaching to the choir. Most of us here do know this, but could we get a copy of at least some of the PowerPoint slides so that we could maybe bring it to committee and preach to even a bigger audience if possible?
Yes, of course.
We are working with the irrigation company. The zones, there's lots of zones. It is complex. It is not well adjusted yet, as Bob can attest to. There are areas that are way too wet. But can you address the fact that a lot of what we're dealing with here is clay? And how do we choose plants based on clay?
Well, the clay, is definitely going to be different than your sandy soil. So drainage too is also might be an issue why you're having some really wet areas as well. There's some plants that are going to be okay with the clay. Sometimes clay can have some advantages that it has a little bit better, what we call cation exchange capacity. So it has a little bit better nutrient retention in the sense that, it works a little bit better with the organic matter that you put on it. So the main thing that I'm thinking about in terms of the plants is, finding out the pH of the clay soil, and then plants that are going to be able to establish their root systems into that clay, because that's another challenge with the clay. I'd have to familiarize myself with what type of clay you have, because there's also variants of clay as well, and some are harder for plant roots to get into. Some have a lot of shrinking and expanding, which can also impact how the plants survive in there, or how the landscape is maintained. But there are definitely things that we could recommend for the clay soils based on also the light requirements and the water availability as well.
Thank you. We have one here.
Yes.
I hope this is a constructive criticism. I found your talk excellent, but I found the text in your visuals impossible to read.
Okay. Thank
You
you.
have to have contrast. That's the primary goal in such text, and yours is the worst I've ever seen. You really need to rework that.
Okay. Thank you.
One of our major challenges here is that 60% of the people living in Okemuk are coming from other areas of the state or nation. And many of them, especially those from South Florida, are used to a different kind of environment than Gainesville, and are used to the golf course mentality, is what I call. And so we have been trying to encourage Florida-friendly landscaping here. And unfortunately, when these people come in, and our new CEO is one of them, they think we should look a certain way year-round. And the reality is we got rid of our person who'd been here for 17 years and knew the landscape and what would survive and not survive here. So it's kind of an ongoing educational issue that we have to deal with people coming in. And we've tried to, I love the Florida Friendly Landscaping book that FFL put out, and we used to be able to get free copies of it to give to new people.
You can.
Can we still get those?
You can. We have a limited amount, and they're pushing on the apps because it enables to reach more people, but we could get you copies as well. And I'd be happy to present along with the EPD to the board or the decision makers to show them, as the previous person mentioned, we need to speak to the people who are making those decisions.
Right, because we don't have any control now over the landscaping company that's come in from Ocala. And right now, our landscape looks awful.
And I've seen them blowing the grass cuttings down the drains.
No.
Put it on wheels.
The EPD would not want to hear that.
Going back to one of your earlier slides, you had the current water consumption, the projected water consumption at our present rates.
Not on.
And then the third column was much smaller with if we adopted Florida-friendly plantings.
Yes.
I'd like to see a fourth column in there of when do we run out of water?
agriculture, they're going to have to change so many different things to deal with that they just don't have the water available to them right now. So that's where we're trying to be a little bit more proactive so that going into the future, we can still maintain the agriculture that we need and the development that we need to support the population here.
Thank you so much. I remember reading just in the last couple of days about a state, and I think it might have been Wisconsin, who is paying homeowners to plant pollinator-friendly landscaping. And I was blown away by that. It's such a wonderful idea. I know the likelihood of that happening in Florida is nil, but I just wonder if counties could take a look at that.
Yeah, as maybe like a subsidy. I definitely think it's something to approach, if we're interested in that and there's movement towards that. Certainly pollinator gardens are very, very popular right now. What we've been doing in an extension is to provide seeds and education so that people can get those established. And we're also looking at more public areas, so like roadways. How can we expand other areas to include those pollinator plants? So we have basically, areas where those insects can go. If they can't find it in a yard, they have other places that they can visit. Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, hold on while I get over there.
Want me to go, Diane? Want me to go?
Okay. We're getting our exercise.
Yeah. These are great questions.
We are a development. Would you be willing to provide seeds and advice to a development such as Okamic?
Well, we'd have to look at, how much seed, if you're going to do something like a pollinator meadow or pollinator area, then we can talk about, maybe establishing a certain project in a certain area. That's where maybe we want to look to get sponsorship to support some of those, because even though I'm part of a large institution, my funding abilities are quite limited, but we do have support from the city of Gainesville to do Florida-friendly projects. So I think it's, just figuring out what those projects look like.
Well, it's something we have on the back burner because we're waiting for a landscape design, but maybe we'll be talking to you.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay, thank you. I think we've taken up quite a bit of Cynthia's time, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. But first, Julianne needs to say something about the field trip.
What I was going to offer is I have the field trip sign up here. The limit is 25. And we just want to make sure that anybody who signs up for this is registered for the course. Okay, so I have this clipboard here. Thank you.
And we'll see you next week.